Mahabharata is an earlier Indonesian book. Section 6. Santosaba Works. Created as a discourse to scientists based on academic studies and studies, in an effort to restore the true history of Indonesia. Indonesia Arya. By Santosaba. Exploration and Research. Complete info. WhatsApp to +62 813 2132 9787. Bhisma. During the time of the Mahabharata there was a king named Pradipa. Bhisma was a descendant of Kuru or Kuruwangsa, reigning in Hastinapura. King Pradipa had an empress named Sunanda of the Siwi kingdom, who gave birth to 3 sons. Among the 3 sons, Santanu was crowned king. King Santanu married Dwi Ganga, then had 8 sons who were the incarnation of 8 Wasu. Every time his son was born, his mother went to the river and drowned him. It happened 7 times. When the 8th son was born, Rajamas followed and prevented his wife from drowning their 8th child. The son of that survivor was named Dewabrata, who later became known as Bhisma. Raja Santanu married once again to a fisherman's daughter named Satyawati. Satyawati gave birth to 2 sons, named Chitrangada and Wisatrawirya. The 7 sons who were drowned were the incarnation of the 8 Wasu who suffered a curse because of their actions of stealing the magic bull belonging to Resi Wasistha. On their way to earth, they met Dwi Ganga, who also wanted to come down to the world to become the wife of the son of King Pradipa, namely Santanu. 8 Wasu then made an agreement with Dwi Ganga that they would incarnate as 8 sons of King Santanu and be born by Dwi Ganga. Bhishma is an incarnation of Wasu named Prabhata. While his 7 older siblings who were born succeeded in ending the curse because they were drowned in the Ganges River by their own mother, Bhishma did not succeed in following in the footsteps of the other 7 Wasu because he was prevented by his father. Then, the mother took Bhishma who was still a baby to paradise, leaving Prabhu Santanu alone. After 36 years, Dwi Ganga handed the child to the king in the lower reaches of the river, and gave him the name Dewabrata. Dewabrata then became a smart and handsome prince, and was nominated as heir to the kingdom. But because of her promise to Sangdasapati, Satyawati's father, her stepmother Irela not to inherit the throne and not to marry for life so that her descendants would not fight for the throne of the kingdom with Satyawati's descendants. Because of his sincerity, he was given the name Bhisma and was awarded to be able to befriend the god of time so that he could determine the time of his own death. The name Bhishma in the Indian version of Sanskrit means, he whose vows are great, because he vows to live celibacy forever and not inherit the throne of his kingdom. The name Dewabrata was changed to Bhishma because he was doing Bhishan Pradgaya, which is an oath to be celibate forever and not to inherit his father's throne. This was because Bhisma did not want him and his descendants to clash with the descendants of Satyawati, his stepmother. Bhisma studied statecraft from Brihaspati, teacher of the gods, Vedic and Vedanga knowledge from Risawasistha, and warfare from Parasurama, Ramaparasu, Rama Bhargava, a Kshatriya legendaris and one of the Chiranjeevan. By studying him Bhishma was adept at using all types of weapons and because of his intelligence he was feared by all his opponents. Within the kingdom of Hastinapura, Bhisma was highly respected by her children and grandchildren. Not only because he was an adult, but also because of his proficiency in warfare. In every battle, he must always win because he is very experienced. Bhisma has 2 half-sisters from her stepmother named Satyawati. They are named Citrangadad and Wisatrawirya. For the sake of the happiness of her siblings, she went to the Kasi kingdom and won the competition so that she succeeded in bringing home 3 daughters named Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika, to be married to their younger siblings. Javanese version of Bhisma. Bhisma was the son of Prabhu Santanu, King Astina with Dwi Ganga aka Dwi Janawi, in the Javanese version. When he was a child, he was named Raden Dewabrata which means the noble Bharata descendant. It also has another name Gangadatta. He is one of the unmarried puppet figures who is referred to by the term Brahmacharan. Resides in the Takanda Hermitage. Bhisma in a puppet character is depicted as a powerful person, in which he is entitled to Astina's throne but because of his lofty desire to avoid a split in Astina's country he is willing not to become king. Rishi's Bhishma was very powerful and many fell on their knees to him. He participated in a competition to get a daughter for King Hastina and brought 3 goddesses. One of the daughters he won was Dwi Amba and Dwi Amba turned out to love Bhishma. Bhishma could not accept Dewi Amba's love because she was only the representative to get Dewi Amba. However, Dewi Amba still insists that she only wants to marry Bhisma. Bhisma also scares Dewi Amba with her real weapon, which accidentally kills Amba. Dewi Amba, who is dying, is embraced by Bhishma while stating that in fact he also loves Dewi Amba. After the spirit of Dewi Amba came out of her body, then said that she would pick up Bhisma one day so that she could be together in another world, and Bhishma also supported her. It was told that the spirit of Dewi Amba incarnated to Srikandi, who would kill Bhishma in the Bharatayuddha war. It is said that when he was born, his mother went to the afterlife, leaving Dewabrata, who was still a baby. His father, Santanu, then looked for a woman who was willing to breastfeed Dewabrata to the country of Warata. He met Dewi Durgandini or Dewi Satyawati, Parasara's wife, who had the son of Rezi Vyasa. After Durgandini's divorce, she was made empress of Prabhu Santanu and gave birth to Citrangada and Visitrawirya, who became Bhishma's siblings from another mother's father. After marrying Citrangada and Visitrawirya, King Santanu stepped down as a hermit, and was replaced by his son. Unfortunately, the two children later died in succession, so that the throne of Astina and the widow Citrangada and Visitrawirya were handed over to Vyasa, the son of Durgandini from the first husband. It was Vyasa who then sent Pandu and Dhritarashtra, parents of the Pandavas and the Kauravas. For his promise to defend Astina, Bhisma sided with the Kauravas and was killed by Srikandi in the Bharatayuddha war. Bhishma has certain powers, that is, he can determine the time of his own death. Bhisma's half-sister, Visitrawirya, died shortly after her marriage. He has no children. Therefore, Satyawati sent Visitrawirya's two wives, namely Ambika and Ambalika, to meet Rishi Vyasa, because the Rishi was going to hold a ceremony for them to have offspring. Vyasa. The Indian version of Vyasa has the title Veda Vyasa, the person who collected various works of sages from earlier times, wrote them down. He is also known as Krishna Dvaipayana. He is a philosopher, writer of India who wrote the greatest epic in the world, namely Mahabharata. Visnupurana states that the universe is a cycle, exists and does not repeat itself. Each cycle is led by several Manus, one for each Manvantara, which has 4 ages, called Katoruga, 4 Yuga. Dwaparayuga is the 3rd Yuga. The Purana. In every 3rd age, Dwapara, Vishnu, in the person of Vyasa, to maintain the quality of mankind, divides the Vedas, which should be one, into several parts. Observing the limitations of perseverance, energy, and with impermanent existence, he makes the Veda 4 parts, according to his capacity, and the raga he wore, in carrying out his duties to classify, was known as Vedayasa. Quote, Krishna Dvaipayana divides the Veda into 4 parts, Katarveda, and therefore he also has the name Veda Vyasa, which means, divider of the Veda. The word Vyasa means, to split, to break, to distinguish. In the process of codifying Veda, Vyasa was assisted by 4 of his students, namely Pulaha, Jaimini, Samantu, and Vesampayana. At one point, Rezi Vyasa wanted to compile a family history of Bharata. With the approval of Lord Brahma, Hyang Ganapati Ganesha came to help Vyasa. Ganapati asked Vyasa to tell him Mahabharata without stopping, while Ganapati would write it down. After 2.5 years, the Mahabharata was compiled. Prominent Rishi Vesa students such as Pulaha, Jaimini, Sumantu, and Vesampayana recounted it repeatedly and spread it all over the world. Vyasa's parents are Rezi Parasara and Satyawati, aka Durgandini or Gandawati. It is said that one day, Rezi Parasara stood on the bank of the Yamuna river, asking to be crossed by boat. Satyawati approached him and then escorted him to the other side by boat. In the middle of the river, Rishi Parasara was captivated by Satyawati's beauty. Satyawati then chatted with Rezi Parasara, while telling her that she had an illness that caused her body to smell bad. Satyawati's father advised that any man who could cure his illness could be made a husband. Hearing this, Rishi Parasara said that he was willing to cure Satyawati's disease. Due to his supernatural powers as a Rishi, Parasara healed Satyawati in an instant. After the proposal was approved by Satyawati's parents, Parasara and Satyawati got married. The bride and groom enjoy their first night on an island in the middle of the Yamuna River, India. There, Risa Parasara created a thick, dark fog so that the island could not be seen by people. From the results of the relationship, was born a child who was very extraordinary. He was given the name Krishna Dwaipayana, because of his black skin, Krishna, and was born in the middle of the island Dwaipayana. The boy grew to adulthood quickly and followed in his father's footsteps as a rishi. Vyasa is also known as the author, recorder, of history in the Mahabharata, but he is also an important figure in the history he compiled. His mother, Satyawati, was married to Santanu, king of Hastinapura. From his marriage, Citrangada and Visitravirya were born. Apart from being known as a figure who divides the Veda into 4 parts, Vyasa is also known as a writer, recorder, of history in the Mahabharata. But he is also an important figure in the history he compiled. His mother, Satyawati, was married to Santanu, king of Hastinapura. From his marriage were born Citrangada and Visitravirya. Citrangada died in a battle, while Visitravirya died of illness. Since the 2 princes died without having children, Satyawati summoned Vyasa to carry out a yajna, sacred ceremony, to obtain offspring. The 2 widows of Visitravirya, Ambika and Ambalika, were asked to face Vyasa alone for the ceremony. Abhyasa Javanese version. Abhyasa is the son of Parasara and Durgandini. It is said that Durgandini suffered from a fishy smell on his body since he was born. He was treated by Parasara, a young priest, on a boat until he recovered. The 2 of them fell in love with each other and had intercourse, so that Abhyasa was born. Abhyasa was not born alone. Parasara also created 6 boats, diseases, and medical tools into humans, namely Sedatama, Rakatsatriya, Bhimakinka, Kinsaka, Rupakinka, and Rajamala. All of them were brotherhood with Abhyasa. Durgandini later became consort of Santanu, king of Hastina. She gave birth to Citrangada and Citravirya. Each successively ascended the throne to replace Santanu. However, both of them were young. Citrangada died when he was not married, while Citravirya died when he did not have a son. Durgandini then called Abhyasa to marry the 2 widows of Citravirya, namely Ambika and Ambalika. At that time he had just been meditating so that his body condition was very bad and terrible. Take the fear the first time you meet them until you close your eyes. Abhyasa predicted that Ambika would give birth to a blind son. Meanwhile, Ambalika looked away in fear. Abhyasa predicted that Ambalika would give birth to a baby with a deformed neck. Abhyasa also married Ambalika's maid named Daitri. The woman was scared and tried to run. He also predicted that one day he would give birth to a son with limp legs. Finally, Ambika, Ambalika, and Daitri each gave birth to sons who were named Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura. The legal heir to Hastina's throne was actually Bhishma, son of Santanu, from the first wife. But he had vowed not to become king, so that as a substitute for Citravirya, Abhyasa took the throne until his 3 sons grew up. After the time came, Abhyasa stepped down and was replaced by Pandu as the next Hastina king. He returned to being a priest at the Radawu hermitage located in the Saptarga mountains. Abhyasa is a high priest who is highly respected. Not only did the Hastina Sajayang family make it a place for advice, but also from other countries. The puppet version tells the story of Abhyasa's death shortly after the Bharatayuddha war ended, when his descendant, Parakazit, the grandson of Arjuna, was born. It is said that for his services during his life in the world, a golden train came from heaven to pick up Abhyasa. He also ascended to heaven with all his sports. The name Dipayana was later inherited by Parakazit. Javanese version of Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra in Javanese puppets is referred to as Abhyasa's biological son. Dhritarashtra, or sometimes simply Destarata, was born by Ambika in a blind state as a reminder because when she first met Abhyasa, her mother closed her eyes. Abhyasa's arrival to the land of Hastina was at the invitation of his mother, namely Durgandini, to marry Citravirya's widows. The aim was to continue the lineage of the Bharata house, because the true heir, Bhishma, had sworn to live Wadat. As a child, Dhritarashtra and his 2 younger siblings, namely Pandu and Vidura, studied with Bhisma about the science of government and supernatural powers. Even though he is blind, Dhritarashtra is able to master the science of liber geni so that he is able to crush anything through his hands. It is said that Pandu returned from Mandura with Kunti as a prize for the competition, as well as Madrimputri from Mandaraka. On the way, the group was blocked by Jendana, the king of Plaseyanar, who was late in participating in the competition in Mandura. A battle broke out between the two and ended in Jendong's death. He intends to leave his two younger siblings, namely Gendari and Senkuni, to be brought by Pandu. Arriving at Hastina, Pandu handed over his 3 daughters to be chosen as Dhritarashtra's wife. His brother chose Gendari, who he predicted would give him many sons. This marriage gave birth to 100 children, who were known as the Kauravas. Because of his physical disability, Hastina's throne was handed over to Pandu, while Abhyasa, who acted as king, temporarily returned to his hermitage in Saptarga. Meanwhile, Dhritarashtra was appointed as a duke, vassal king, in the Gajah area, while Widora was in Pagombakan. Pandu Indian version. Pandu is the second child. His brother is Dhritarashtra, who is actually the heir of the Kuru kingdom with the seat of government in Hastinapura, but because he is blind, the throne is handed over to Pandu and Widora, who do not have any magical knowledge but have extraordinary wisdom, especially in the field of administration. The name Pandu or Pandu in Sanskrit means pale, and his skin is indeed pale, because when his mother Ambalika held a Putrotpadana ceremony to have a child, he had a pale face. Among Jawi Old Javanese, Sundanese, Pandu comes from Wandu, which means not male, not female, but not effeminate. Strictly speaking, Saharoning Lanong Ana Wadan, Saharoning Wadan Analanong, are humans who have found their soul mate from within themselves. Pandu is a skilled archer. He led the Dhritarashtra army and also ruled the kingdom for him. Pandu conquered the territories of Dasarna, Kashi, Anga, Wanga, Kalinga, Magadha, and others. While hunting in the forest, Pandu accidentally shot a rishi who was having sex with his wife. For this act, the rishi cursed Pandu so that he would die when he had intercourse with his wife. Since then, when Pandu has intercourse with his wife, he will die. In a competition, Prabhu Pandu won the competition to get Kuntiputri from King Kuntiboja. Prabhu Salya from the Madra kingdom, who came late, challenged Pandu to get Dui Kunti with the bet that Dui Madri was his sister. Salya and Pandu then competed and Pandu won, so that he also got Madri as the second wife. Madri was married to Pandu to strengthen the relationship between Hastinapura and the Madra kingdom. Pandu bore the curse that he would die if he had intercourse, so he could not have children. Finally, Pandu and his wife wandered in the forest as hermits and left Hastinapura. There, Kunti cast a secret spell to summon the gods. He used this mantra 3 times to summon Deva Yama, Bayu, and Indra. Of the 3 gods he received 3 sons, namely Yudhishthira, Bhima, and Arjuna. Kunti also gave Madri the opportunity to summon a god. Madri called Deva a swin, and got twin sons named Nakula and Sadeva. 15 years after he was single, when Kunti and his sons were far away, Pandu tempted and tried to have sex with Madri. For this action, Pandu Wafat was in accordance with the curse uttered by the rishi who had killed him. Both Kunti and Madri are sad and want to do sadhya, but Madri declares that he caused the death, so let him do sadhya and entrust his twins, Nakula and Sadeva, to be cared for by Kunti while he burns himself to follow her husband into the afterlife. Java version guide. In the puppet, the character Pandu, Javanese, Pandu, is Byasa's son who marries Ambalika, the widow of Wisitrawirya. In fact, it is said that Byasa inherited the throne of Hastinapura as a temporary king until Pandu grew up. Pandu is depicted as having a handsome face but has a defect in the neck, as a result of his mother looking away when he first met Byasa. The puppeteers develop the story of Pandu's youth, which is only written briefly in the Mahabharata. For example, Pandu is said to have always been actively involved in helping his cousins' marriages in Mathura. Pandup was once asked by the gods to destroy the heavenly enemy named Prabhu Nagapaya, a giant king who could transform into a dragon from the land of Goabarong. After successfully carrying out his duties, Pandu received a prize in the form of an heirloom of tala oil. Pandu then married Kunti after winning a competition in Mathura country. He even received an additional prize, namely Princess Madri, after defeating Salya, the princess's sister. On the way he also managed to get another daughter named Gandhari from the land of Plaseyanar, after defeating his brother named Prabhu Jendana. This last daughter was then handed over to Dhritarashtra, Pandu's sister. Pandu took the throne at Hastina, replacing Vyasa with the title Prabhu Pandu Dewanada, or Prabhu Gandhawakstra. He ruled with Gandamana, prince of Panchala, as governor. This Gandamana figure was then cunningly removed by Sankuni, Gandhari's younger brother. From his 2 wives, Pandu got 5 sons called Pandavas. Unlike the Indian version of the Mahabharata, the 5 are really Pandu's sons, and not the result of a god's gift. The gods are said to have assisted their birth. For example, Bhattara Dharma helped the birth of Yudhishthira, and Bhattara Bayu helped the birth of Bhima. Pandu's 5 sons were all born in Hastina, not the forest as narrated in the Indian Mahabharata. Pandu's death in the puppet was not due to having sex with Madri, but because he fought against Prabhu Tremboko, his own student. It is said that Madri craved an excursion on the Nandini ox, Bhattara Guru's vehicle. Pandu also went up to heaven to apply for his wife. As a condition, he is willing to live a short life and go to hell. Bhattara Guru granted the request. Pandu and Madri have an excursion on the back of Nandini's ox. Once satisfied, they returned the ox to Bhattara Guru. A few months later, Madri gave birth to twins named Nakula and Sadeva. According to his ability, Pandu has a short life. As a result of fighting against one another from Sankuni, Pandu was also involved in a war against his own student, a giant king from the land of Pringadani named Prabhu Tremboko. This war is known as Pamaksa. In that war, Tremboko was killed by Pandu's arrow, but he injured his opponent's thigh using a keris called Kyaikalanada. As a result of the wound in the thigh, Pandu fell ill. He finally died after lowering the will for Hastinapura to be temporarily ruled by Dhritarashtra until Pandavad matured. Between Pandu and Tremboko's sons and daughters, there was a marriage, namely Bhima and Hidambi, who gave birth to Ghatotbaka, a knight of mixed blood, human and giant. The Pamaksa term surrounding the Javanese version of Pandu's death is different from the term Moksha in Hinduism. In Pamaksa, Pandu dies and is destroyed along with his entire body. His soul then entered hell according to the agreement. Due to the struggle of his second son, Bhima several years later, Pandu finally got a place in heaven. Another, more dramatic version tells Pandu that he continues to live in hell with Madri according to his promise to the gods. For him, it doesn't matter even if he stays in hell, as long as he can see the success of his sons in the world. The joy of seeing the Pandavas' Dharma devotion made him feel alive in heaven. Indian version of the Vidura. Vidura is Pandu and Dhritarashtra's half-sister because they have the same father, but different from mother. It is said that when Ambalika was asked to go to Rishi Vyasa to get offspring, he refused because he was afraid of the look on the sage's face, which was very powerful. Fulfilling the request of her father-in-law, namely Satyavati, Ambalika sent a servant to meet Rishi Vyasa alone in a room. The servant served the sage well so that the sage said that one day the child who would be born from the servant's womb would behave in a noble manner. Rishi Vyasa also said that the child the servant would give birth to was an incarnation of Lord Dharma. However, one thing that makes Satyavati disappointed is that the son is not the descendant of his son-in-law, but the descendant of a servant. When Vidura was young, he studied under Bhisma along with his 2 siblings. According to Mahabharata, he is wisest when compared to his brothers. He studied to be the king's minister, while Pandu was appointed warlord, while Dhritarashtra was chosen as the crown prince. Because Dhritarashtra was blind, Pandu replaced him and ruled on behalf of Dhritarashtra, while Vidura was the king's advisor and accompanied Dhritarashtra. Vidura was a responsive person when an evil intention arose in the hearts of Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana to get rid of the Pandavas. So before the Pandavas left for Varanawada for vacation, Vidura warned Yudhishthira to be careful of the Kauravas and their father, namely Dhritarashtra. When the safety of the Pandavas and their mother was threatened in Varanawada, Vidura repeatedly sent messengers to help the Pandavas escape from every disaster that befell him. In the dispute between the Kauravas and the Pandavas over the Hastinapura issue, Vidura had tried to reconcile it, bearing in mind that the 2 sides were one family and brothers. In his search for peace he contacted the Pandavas and Kaurava elders, including Rezi Bhisma, Rezi Drona, King Dhritarashtra, Shri Kresna, Yudhishthira and Duryodhanasarta stated that he wrote the charter of handing over Hastinapura from Resi Vyasa Abhyasa to King Dhritarashtra as royal court after King Panduduanada died. When the war in Kurukshetra raged, Vidura remained in Hastinapura even though the world did not side with the Kauravas. The Javanese version of Vidura. Vidura is often referred to by the name Yamavidura. He is the Duke of Pagambakkan, a small country under Hastina. Vidura was Abhyasa's third son who was born to a lady named Daitri. Abhyasa then orders his mother Durgandini to connect with Ambali once again. Ambalika ordered her maid named Daitri to disguise herself as herself. It turned out that Daitri was also scared when he met Abhyasa. He tried to run out of the room. As a result, Daitri gave birth to a baby with limp legs, which was named Vidura. Vidura married Padmarini, the daughter of Dipakandra from Pagambakkan, a subordinate of the land of Hastina. Vidurak then replaced Dipakandra after his father-in-law died. The one who served as Patiti Pagambakkan was Jayasmiti. Vidura had a son named Sanjaya who was the guide for the Dhritarashtra. Meanwhile, in the Indian version, there is absolutely no blood relationship between Vidura and Sanjaya. After Pandu's death, his 5 sons, called Pandavas, did not stay at Hastina's palace, but instead lived with Vidura in Pagambakkan. Vidura succeeded in educating his 5 nephews to become the main human beings. In the world of politics, Vidura was hostile to Sankuni, his brother-in-law. Dhritarashtra who holds the rank of governor. Sankuni himself instilled hatred in the hearts of his nephews, namely the Kauravas, to hate the Pandavas since childhood. When the Pandavas were about to be given the throne of Hastina inherited from Pandu, they were first trapped by the Kauravas in the Sigala Gala hall which was burned. However, because Vidura built a secret tunnel under the building, Pandava and his mother, Kunti, managed to escape from death. Vidura had a very long life. Meanwhile his son, Sanjaya, died in the Bharatayan war against Karna. Vidura died while meditating in the forest, when the Pandavas had succeeded in regaining power over the land of Hastina after the destruction of the Kauravas. Indian version of Kunti. Kunti is the daughter of King Kuntabhoja from Wangsa Resni. She is the brother of Basudwayang who is the father of Balarama, Kresna and Subhadra. Kunti's father was King Surasena of the Yadavas, and as a baby he was given the name Pritha. He is the younger brother of Vasudeva, Krishna's father. Then he was adopted by the childless King Kunti Boha, and since then he was given the name Kunti. After Kunti became his daughter, King Kuntabhoja was awarded a child. When Kunti was young, he entertained his father's guest well, a pastor named Resi Durwasa. Due to the banquet, Durwasa was delighted and awarded Kunti a supernatural power called Adityaridaya, which is a kind of mantra to be able to summon any god and give him a child without the need to undergo pregnancy. When Kunti asked why he was given this mantra, the rishi replied that he would need it later. Because he was not sure how effective the spell was, Kunti tried to use the mantra Adityaridaya while looking at the rising sun. As a result, the sun god Suryam appeared and was ready to bestow Kunti with a son. Frightened Kunti replied that he only wanted to try Adityaridaya's efficacy. He refused to have children because at that time he was not married. Surya stated emphatically that Adityaridaya was not a toy. Surya then said, and immediately Kunti became pregnant. But thanks to the help of the sun god, in a short time Kunti immediately gave birth to a son. Then Surya returned to heaven after restoring the virginity of the Javanese version of Kunti. Kunti's teacher is named Resi Durwasa, while the mantra is he taught named Aji Punta Wekasingrasa Sipta Tungal without opponent. In this version, it was not Bhattara Surya who helped birth Karna, but Resi Durwasa himself. With her supernatural powers, she helped Kunti give birth to this son of Surya through the ear so that her virginity was maintained. Meanwhile, the Indian version mentions that Kunti gave birth normally with Surya's help. Kunti didn't want to have a son when he was young, so he put the child in a basket and washed him down the Aswa river. Then the son was picked up by a coachman in the Keratin of Hastinapura named Adarata, and the child was given the name Karna. Indian version of Salya. Salya is the king of the Madra kingdom. The king of the Madra kingdom was originally named Artayana, who had 2 children named Salya and Madri. After Artayana died, Salya succeeded him as king. Referring to her father's name, Salya in India's Mahabharata is often called Artayani. Salya has two sons named Rukmarata and Rukmangada. However, the name of his wife or the mother of the two children is not clear. The Javanese version of Bharatayuddha, which is an old Javanese text, states that the name of Salya's wife is Satyawati. From this marriage, Rukmarata was born. Salya Javanese version. The story of Salya and Satyawati's marriage is in the Javanese puppet version. Salya, who was young named Narasoma, went on a journey because she refused to be arranged by her father. On the way he met a giant Brahmin named Rezi Bagaspati who wanted to make him his son-in-law. Bagaspatimangaku has a beautiful daughter named Pujawati who dreams of meeting Narasoma and falling in love with her. Narasoma refused Bagaspati's proposal because he was sure that Pujawati must also have the face of a giant. The two of them fought. Narasoma was defeated and was taken by Bagaspati to his residence in the Arga split hermitage. Arriving at Argabella, Narasoma was surprised to find out that Pujawati was truly beautiful. He also changed his mind and was willing to marry Bagaspati's daughter. The arrogant Narasoma was disgusted by having a giant's in-laws. The innocent Pujawati conveyed this to Bagaspati. Bagaspati told her daughter to choose between father or husband. It turned out that Pujawati chose her husband. Bagaspati was proud to hear this and changed Pujawati's name to Satyawati. Satyawati told Narasoma that her father was ready to die rather than disturb the harmony of their household. Bagaspati was willing to be killed as long as Satyawati was not combined. Narasoma available. He then stabbed Bagaspati but it did not work. Bagaspati realized that he had a magic knowledge called Kandabarawa. He also passed the knowledge on to Narasoma first, then he stabbed Bagaspati in the elbow, which is the place of his weakness. This time Bagaspati passed immediately. Narasoma then brought Satyawati back to Mandaraka. Mandrapati welcomed Narasoma and Satyawati happily. But he turned sad when he heard about the death of Bagaspati, who turned out to be his best friend. Mandrapati was angry and drove Narasoma away from the palace. Madrime, who was still homesick, immediately followed his brother's departure. Narasoma and Madrime arrive at the Mandura kingdom where a competition is being held to get the country's princess named Kunti. By deploying Kandabarawa, Salya succeeded in defeating all the applicants and winning Kunti. The prince of Hastina's guide arrived late and decided to go home. Narasoma prevented and challenged him. But Pandu did not want to take up the challenge because Narasoma had already been declared the winner. The arrogant Narasoma continues to insist, even handing over Kunti and Madrime at the same time if Pandu is able to defeat him. Pandu is forced to serve Narasoma's challenge. Narasoma also mobilized Kandabarawa knowledge. From his finger appeared a dwarf but ferocious giant, which if injured in number would increase in number. Pandu was pressed. On the advice of his assistant named Samar, he made a moment of silence and surrendered himself to God. Strangely, in that way Kandabarawa was paralyzed by itself. Parasoma gave up losing. The goal of joining the competition was not because you wanted Kunti, but just to try Kandabarawa's efficacy. According to the agreement, Kunti and Madrime were handed over to Pandu. Narasoma then returned to Mandaraka and was shocked by the sudden death of his father. It is said that Mandrapati was very saddened by the death of Bagaspati, who was killed by Narasoma. He felt that he had failed to be a good father and decided to commit suicide following his best friend. Narasoma then replaced Mandrapati as king, with the title Salya. His government was accompanied by Tuhayata as governor. Even though he had become king, Salya was still arrogant. He immediately accepted Duryodhanaraja Hastina's proposal, who was the richest king in the world at that time, to marry Arawati, his eldest daughter. However, Arawati then disappeared and was kidnapped. Arawati was rescued by Balarama who at that time disguised himself as a young priest. According to the agreement, Arawati should have been handed over to Balarama. However, it was postponed because Salya preferred to have a son-in-law of a king. Only when he found out that Balarama was in fact the king of the Mandura kingdom that Arawati was handed over to him. Salya again accepted Duryodhana's proposal for Sirtakanti. But his second daughter was kidnapped and married to Karna. Duryodhana gave up because Karna did a lot to her. He then married another daughter of Salya, namely Banawati. The Indian version of Sakuni or Sankuni. Sakuni or Sankuni is the older brother of Gandhari and thus is the uncle of the Kauravas from the mother's side. They are from the Gandhara kingdom. Sakuni's father was named Suwala. One day his daughter Gandhari was proposed to be the wife of Dhritarashtra, a blind prince from Hastinapura. Sankuni was angry with his father's decision to accept the proposal. According to him, Gandhari should be the wife of Pandu, Dhritarashtra's younger brother. However, because everything had happened, he followed Gandhari, who then settled in the Hastinapura palace. Sakuni is said to be the reincarnation of Dwapara while Duryodhana is the reincarnation of Kali, the god who is in charge of creating chaos on the face of the earth. Sankuni Javanese version. In puppetry, especially in Java, Sankuni is not Gandhari's older brother, but his younger brother. Meanwhile, the puppet version of Gandhara is not the name of a kingdom, but the name of their oldest brother. At first the king of the Placianar kingdom was named Suwala. After he died, he was succeeded by his son named Gandhara. One day Gandhara, accompanied by his two younger siblings, namely Gandhari and Suman, went to the Mandura kingdom to participate in a competition to win Kunti, the daughter of the country. On the way, Gandhara's group ran into Pandu who was on his way back to Hastina kingdom after winning the Kunti competition. The battle ensued. Gandhara finally died at the hands of Pandu. Pandu then took Gandhari and Suman to Hastina. Arriving at Hastina, Gandhari was asked by Pandu's brother, Dhritarashtra, to be made a wife. Gandhari was very angry because he actually wanted to be Pandu's wife. Suman also promised to always help his brother to vent his hurt. He was determined to create enmity between the Kauravas, the children of Dhritarashtra, against the Pandavas, the children of Pandu. One day Suman managed to pit Pandu against his pupil who was a giant named Tremboko. So that created tension between the kingdom of Hastina and the kingdom of Pringadani. Pandu also sent Gandamana as an ambassador for peace. Gandamana was the prince of the Panchala kingdom who chose to serve as governor in the Hastina kingdom during Pandu's reign. Suman, who was very ambitious to take the position of Pada, used cunning methods to get rid of Gandamana. On the way, Suman trapped Gandamana so that he fell into his trap. Suman then returned to Hastina to report to Pandu that Gandamana had betrayed and sided with the enemy. Pandu, who was currently unstable, immediately decided to appoint Suman as a new coach. Suddenly, Gandamana, who is still alive, appears and drags Suman away. Suman was beaten so badly that his handsome form turned ugly. Since then, Suman has also been known as Sankuni, derived from the words Saka and Uni, which means, from speech. That is, he is suffering from ugly disabilities due to the result of his own words. After Pandu died, his inheritance, which was named Minyak Tala, was entrusted to Dhritarashtra so that it would be handed over to the Pandavas when they grew up. Tala oil itself is a sacred gift from the gods as a gift because Pandu has killed his heavenly enemy named Nagapaya. Several years later, there was a struggle between the Pandavas against the Kauravas who apparently also wanted Tala oil. Dhritarashtra decided to throw the oil along with its container in the form of a kupu as far as it could go. The Pandavas and the Kauravas immediately split up to prepare to capture him. However, Sankuni cunningly nudged Dhritarashtra's hand when he was about to throw the object. As a result, some of the Tala oil was spilled. Sankuni immediately took off all the clothes and rolled on the floor to wet his skin all over with the oil. Meanwhile, the kupu and the rest of the Tala oil fell into an old well. The Pandavas and the Kauravas were unable to take it. Suddenly a dirty priest named Drona appeared who managed to take the kupu easily. Interested in seeing his supernatural powers, the Kauravas and Pandavas studied from the priest. Sankuni, who had been bathed in Tala oil since then, found that his entire skin was immune to all types of weapons. Even though his martial arts skill was low, there wasn't a single weapon that could penetrate his skin.